Again, if you're just joining us, welcome. We are broadcasting live from the Abbey Church, and more commonly known as First Metropolitan United Church is the space we're in. I'm Rob Crosby-Shearer. I am one of the clergy of Abbey Church and one of the members of Emmaus Community. Emmaus Community is a new monastic community or neo-monastic community. We take vows or commitments to prayer, presence, and simplicity. Abbey Church is one of our Sunday worshiping expressions, which in a few days are moving into this space. So we're really grateful for First Met for actually kind of sneaking us in before we even begin here. One of the things we always do at Abbey Church and Emmaus Community is acknowledge the land we are on. We gather on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And we're honored to be here this morning. It's still morning, at least where we are. So as I've already said, a special thanks to First Met, Emmaus Community, and Abbey Church. And we also want to do a shout out to the Writers Union of Canada and the Canada Council of the Arts, who have supported this book launch today. So that's those things. Some of you, and many of you actually, I know Joe here. Joe is a pastor, a chaplain, and he's very modest. So he said, say that I'm a former actor, but he has a history in theater and a training in theater. So Joe has done some amazing work around Henri Nouwen, a gathering called Love Henry, which was reading the letters of Henry as part of a lecture series in Ontario. So Joe is going to be taking on the persona of Henry and reading those sections of the book today. So that is, I think, what I'm going to say about us.
Some folks have said that they have never seen me act, and other people said, I've never seen him do anything else.
I will, that is true. I will say as well that on a personal level, it was 10 years ago today that I first met Carolyn. I drove across the country with Joe, and it was 10 years ago, and our rental unit opened up on August 1st. So we needed to land somewhere. So Joe said, I have this friend, Carolyn. I'd known Carolyn's name over the years about L'Arche and intentional community and just this sort of writer and academic and amazing person that I'd heard about. But I actually got to meet Carolyn 10 years ago this very day, or today or tomorrow. Can't remember exactly which day, but about 10 years ago. So we'll get to kind of know each other a little bit more as we're talking. But one of the things that Carolyn asked for today was that we could frame our conversation around community. And there's so many beautiful strains in this book. We could talk about art, we could talk about the writing process, we could talk about secular and sacred divide, we could talk about death and life, we could talk about finding God in strange. There's just so many beautiful strands, but we're going to focus in a little bit today. It makes sense for me and for us as Emmaus Community. But I think it makes sense for all of us because there's this overall call to the life of community. So I'm wondering, Carolyn, if we could start off with you before we get into the reading, just kind of you sharing a bit of your story around L'Arche. What was the road to L'Arche, to Henry, to intentional community or unintentional community? Tell us a bit about you.
Well, I thought our best line that we met at a club for people with hyphenated surnames.
That's right.
Yes.
Abbey-Colborne, Carolyn Whitney-Brown,
Rob
Rob Crosby-Shearer. Yeah.
A support group.
That's right. I think it's our kids who need a support group.
That's right.
Let me think. How this book? No.
We can go that route as well if you'd rather go how the book came to be. But I think just a little bit of your spiritual biography. What got you to
right. Well,
L'Arche, to community?
I should say what L'Arche is.
Yeah.
In case anybody doesn't know, L'Arche is an international federation of communities where people with and without intellectual disabilities share their lives together in all kinds of ways. And it's been started in 1964. It's in, or has been in 40 countries. There are 175 with over 10,000 people involved today around the world. And we moved to L'Arche Daybreak, which is north of Toronto in Richmond Hill in 1990. And Henri Nouwen was living there, so we got to know him. And we had come a little bit like Henri. Can you all hear me well enough, by the way? Yeah, okay. We'd come a little like Henri. We'd come out of an academic setting. We'd finished PhDs in English literature at Brown University in the States. And then as we were finishing those, we felt like we wanted to learn more about prayer and community. So we went to England and lived with some intentional Christian communities there and in Africa before we moved to L'Arche in 1990. So we came to L'Arche in a way wanting to learn something more about the heart, feeling like our brains had plenty of attention, but that our hearts and our lives needed to focus differently. So we got to know Henri and we learned, we were all learning together about living in community. Is that one?
I'm sorry, I had a question.
Yeah.
Who is we?
Oh, my husband, Jeff, and I. Jeff's sitting over there. So if I look, if I keep looking that way, that's my husband, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Those
sorry.
of you online can't see.
Yeah,
there's
sorry.
About 5 folks gathered in a circle here as well.
Yeah.
So and Jeff is one of them to our
Sorry.
right here. That's great.
Thank you. And while we were there, we had 3 children also. So we expanded in those years. Yeah.
That's great. And do you want to share just a little bit then of how this book, just, a few sentences on, you've written a number of books on L'Arche and folks connected to L'Arche and things like that. How did this particular one come to be? You explained it in the book, but we're not going to read that section. So
when Henri died suddenly of a heart attack in 1996, and he left behind a project he was really excited about. He was going to write a book about this trapeze troupe in a traveling circus. And I don't know if I can hold up the picture. If any of you don't have the book, see if I can get it close enough for you to see. There he is with his friends, the Flying Rodleys. It was a very specific trapeze troupe, and he met them and he thought he would write something really different. He bought books about writing creative nonfiction. He really wanted not to write a series of lessons about the spiritual life. He wanted to write something that would get readers on the inside of his own excitement, his own physical experience. He didn't even really know what it meant. He just wanted to write something that would be really different. And he thought it was going to be his best book ever. And then he died. And he left it unfinished. And for 25 years almost, the fragments that he left behind sat in the archives. And 5 years ago or so, his literary estate asked me if I would have a go at thinking of what to do with them, because they weren't really a book. And when I looked at them, there were pieces of some chapters, there were some tapes, there were interviews. There's a film made, which has great interviews in it, but it was very fragmentary. And so it became really apparent to me that I couldn't write the book that Henri would have written. I don't know what it would have been. I don't think he got as far as quite figuring out what it was, but I realized it was a great story. And he wanted to write a story. That was his idea. So I could write the story of Henri and the Flying Rodleys, the name of the trapeze troupe. And I could tell that story. So that's how the book came to be.
beautiful. Thanks, Carolyn. And if you haven't read the book, I'd encourage you to, I'm not a salesperson. I'm one of those people who really doesn't like talking about like, you should go get this and you'll be healed or something like that. But I will say it is a stunningly gorgeous book. And I also have a background in English literature and undergrad anyways, for what it's worth. And I really do feel this book ties together that biography, the spirituality, there's this kind of meta narrative of him trying to write the book within there as well. And it's in case, just to give a bit of framework, and Carolyn will sort of set up some of the scenes for us as we begin to read them in a minute. But there's these primary scenes of Henri meeting the circus troupe and how that's affecting him. And then there's this other scene of him having a medical incident at a hotel. And so if you're kind of confused as to what's happening as we're reading, we've tried to focus in a little bit and we'll try and give you context. But if you're wondering, why is he like lying on a stretcher now? And now why is he at the circus? It's kind of going back and forth throughout the narrative. And it's a really beautifully constructed narrative that kind of weaves together all these things and then weaves other things, his involvement in the civil rights movement and his life at L'Arche, and speaking at Catholic AIDS conferences, his own sexuality. Like there's just all of these things going on within the book under the surface. So you'll get a taste of that in the readings. We're going to do about 5 readings all together, and we may sort of talk a little bit between them, but we're going to try and let them flow and speak for themselves for the most part. Just before we do that, and this is Carolyn's request, so don't blame us if you hate it. Apparently, Henri loved to begin his talks with music. And I've heard that from numerous people, and just something kind of fun and sing-alongable and whatever. So we just got here today and Carolyn said, how about I'll fly away? Because this is a book about flying. So Joe and I, Joe taught me everything I know about music because we used to work in street ministry together in Toronto. And so we're gonna sing I'll Fly Away just before we, and right after that, we'll jump right into the readings. And if you're at home and it's not embarrassing to the people who may be home with you or here, feel free to kind of sing along. Some glad morning when this life is over, I'll fly away to a land on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. I'll fly away. Amen. That's right. Say amen, somebody. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Get
Thank
the
you.
energy up in the room and across the country and world. So let's jump right into the reading. I'm going to step back as noted in case you came in late. Joe has a history in acting. Carolyn wrote the book. Joe's going to take on Henri's voice. Carolyn's going to take on the narrator voice. And let us just kind of sink into the text.
And I realized there's something we didn't say about the book, that I left Henri's words intact. So the book's in 2 voices and 2 different typefaces. So when Joe's reading Henri, he's reading verbatim Henri. I didn't edit him. I didn't change him. I left his syntax. Sometimes I tightened it, but it is, I put as much of Henri's own words in the book as I can. So Henri is Henri, and I'm the narrator. Page 10 for those who are interested.
Your hat.
Oh, right. The Henri hat,
Henri wore hats.
like that. Okay. So does Rob, apparently.
Henri.
So it was 1991, and Henri was in Freiburg, Germany. He was working on a book that would become Life of the Beloved when he first saw the Flying Rodleys perform their trapeze act. It left him breathless, almost in tears, as a sudden bodily rush of adolescent infatuation swept over him. He was already 59, so he had not expected to be so stirred when he went to the circus with his elderly father. At first, he had assumed that his sensations were anxiety because the act looked dangerous. It was only later that he recognized his own physical excitement. His response had been so dramatic that he repeatedly struggled to put words around it. First, he had tried dictating a tape to be transcribed by Connie, his secretary back in Canada. He knew he was babbling, but he just couldn't help himself.
What really got to me, what really fascinated me was the trapeze artists. And that's why I became so involved in the circus. And when I saw them at the very beginning, it was absolutely fascinating. This was a group of 5 trapeze artists, 4 of them from South Africa and 1 an American. I was just so impressed by the group that I kept thinking about them. They did incredible things in the air, and somehow that was important that I realized that has always been why I went to the circus. It was never for the animals and never really for the clowns, but what I always wanted for was what really grabbed me. It was the trapeze artists. And these guys were really amazing. Well, actually, they weren't all guys. There were 3 men and 2 women. And I was just fascinated by the way that they were moving freely in the air and making these incredible jumps and catching each other. And I was just fascinated by their physical prowess. But I was as much fascinated by the group as a team, the way they worked together, because I realized there must be enormous intimacy among these people. When everything was so dependent on cooperation, when everything is so dependent on mutual trust, and everything is dependent on exact timing, I realized from the very beginning that this group has to be really well together. And I saw that they enjoyed it. They really had fun doing it. And there was a kind of excitement in them that became very contagious for me. It was a kind of, wow. You know, and I must confess that when I saw them, there seemed to be, in a way, like gods, so far that I wouldn't even dare to come close to them. I had this emotional response that these people are really so far above me in their talent or in their giftedness. They are such great artists. Who am I, a little tiny guy, wanting to get to know them? It seemed to be impossible for me to even imagine myself knowing these people personally. I realized how strong this feeling was. It was like awesome. And there was something in me more than just a feeling of a fan who admires a musician or an artist. It was as if these guys are indeed living in heaven. They are living in the air, and I am living on the ground. And so I am not allowed to talk to them, being so far from each other. I was so fascinated by my own emotional response to them that I wasn't at all comfortable to go and talk to them. They kept sort of being in my fantasies long after the show was over.
Henri couldn't get this experience out of his mind. Perhaps this unlikely new encounter with a troupe of trapeze artists wasn't an interruption from his writing, but rather was the start of a significant new book. Surely he could find a way to describe this experience. Something this amazing should be shared. It was all very exhilarating. But, and now we get to the framing piece of the book, but now it's 1996, and he's lying in a hotel bed near Amsterdam with 2 paramedics hovering around him. Somehow 5 years have gone by since that trip to the circus with his father. It's never been far from his mind, yet he has only fragments of chapters, a diary kept over several weeks, and many ideas. He's failed, at least so far, to write his book about the Flying Rodleys. What would it feel like to let go, he wonders now, watching Denny get out his medical equipment. I never did write that book. He tries whispering to himself. It feels strange to admit that, as though it is a finished fact, as though he could have, but didn't. A casual comment, small talk, unless, of course, an astute listener were to ask, why? To that he realizes he doesn't have an answer.
It's a beautiful setup in the book. I think we'll just kind of keep reading, but you can already hear the tones of community, and there's something drawing him in what he's experiencing there, and this initial response of something intuitive in him called to this sense of what's happening in their interaction. And we don't get to read all of the pages ahead, but that continues both as admiration, but also he gets to know the humanity of it. So in case you're wondering, in case you think we're getting into an idealized picture of community, which it sounds like in his first interaction, and that's, I think, true. We run into these things and it's like, wow, this is what I'm called to be. And then it's like, let's get underneath that a little bit. What's the deep longing? So with that, unless either of you want to say something more, let's keep reading. What do you think? Should we keep reading?
Keep reading.
Let's
Yeah.
do it.
So Henri actually does go and approach the trapeze troupe. He gets to know them. He at one point rents an RV and actually travels around Europe with them. He really tries to get on the inside of their lives, and it changes him. He starts to find new ways to think about God, to think about his life, to tell stories about his time with them. So in 1994, Henri was invited to speak to the National Catholic HIV/AIDS Ministry Conference in Chicago. And he was very unsure. He said yes, and then he said no, and then he said yes. It was very hard for him to say yes. But he did speak. And so Joe will read some of the things he said at that. He starts speaking about his ambivalence about being there. It's the last talk of the conference. But encouraged by the responsive audience, Henri tried to explain the growth that he was experiencing.
Maybe my whole life has been a life in which boundaries were pushed out and broken down. And it has been frightening for me every time a new boundary came tumbling down. So I've realized, okay, I might have started in community or in the church or in the seminary or in my family as a safe, clear place. And then bang, 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 bang. All these other boundaries keep falling. All these little hedges and fences keep falling away. Suddenly, the non-believer might be more believing than the believer. The outsider might have something to teach the insider. Suddenly, the difference between Catholic and Protestant, Christian and Buddhist, religious and secular isn't the kind of difference I thought it was. The difference between male and female, young and old, married and celibate, white and a person of color, all the distinctions that seem so important. Suddenly, the pandemic throws all those differences away. The differences between homosexual and asexual and bisexual people, or between married people and transgender people. I never heard so many terms. It seems that these differences aren't that important, actually. Married, celibate, single. You can be anything, but we are together. The AIDS pandemic brings us together. To tell you that for me personally, and I would guess in some places for you, that when the boundaries are falling away, you get anxious sometimes and you say, now where do I say stop? Or here, this is it. And that it's no longer there. And suddenly you realize that your heart is expanding and there are no boundaries to that expansion.
Sorry, I got so
Are
caught
you
up.
reading that part? I'm sorry, I
Henri-
thought, or maybe not. Did we cut that?
Henri continued talking about the paradox he'd experienced, that love and intimacy and community can unexpectedly reveal a deeper inner loneliness. But sorrow and joy are not separate. They're always in our flesh, Henri asserted boldly. So just start living. Now, studying the responses of the many new friends he'd met over the week at the conference, Henri continued deciding to tell them about the flying Rodleys, and he made it dramatic.
I have a little story to tell you at the end of these reflections. A few years ago, my 88-year-old father came to visit me in Germany, and he wanted to do something fun. So I said, well, let's go to the circus. There were 5 South African trapeze artists. They left the pedestals and danced in the air. And I said to my father, I think I missed my vocation. That's what I always wanted. That's what I always wanted to do, to fly. I said, you go look at the animals in the break, but I'm going to talk to these artists. And I said, hey guys, you are absolutely fabulous. And I was this 16-year-old fan looking at these strong and big 30-year-old guys. And they said, well, do you want to come to our practice tomorrow? And I said, yes, I want to come to your practice tomorrow.
All right, keep getting caught up. Henry's audience whooped as he acted out the scene he was describing. Looking out over people who were daily facing so much death, Henri ached to inspire and encourage them. The spiritual meaning of flying and catching was not just about death, he realized, but about living, about the remarkable community he'd experienced that week in the National Catholic HIV/AIDS Ministry Conference and saw embodied in front of him. The catcher offered an image for dying, but also about the beauty and artistry of flying and catching each other day by day. There was that moment that he couldn't get out of his mind, when the flyer had to let go of everything and fly in midair, trusting that the catcher would be there at the precise moment when most needed. All that week, Henri had listened to how everybody at the conference was involved in that act, disciplined in their love, risking, letting go, trusting, and catching each other. This was the crucial thing he'd learned from Rodley.
The only thing I have to do, Rodley said, is stretch out my hands. After I've done my thing, stretch out and trust that he will be there and pull me right back up. We have to love one another for that kind of trust. You and I are doing a lot of flying, and I wish we do a lot more of it, and a lot of jumping and a lot of saltos, and I hope we can do a few triples. It's wonderful to see, and you will get a lot of applause, and it's good. Enjoy it. But finally, it's trust. Trust when you come down from your triple, know that the catcher will be there.
I'd love us to just take like 5 seconds to kind of pause on that language of the catcher will be there. Just let's sit in a second with that image. It's a beautiful image that recurs through the book, and we'll keep coming back to that. That section, I in my scribbling through the book, writing my notes, was like, this is a beautiful summary of the whole spirituality of the book right here, of this, like, the catcher. We're talking about the catcher, and there's so many things that we could pull out in community about in that section. Really briefly, I wanted to name that line about loneliness, the deep inner loneliness, because it's nice. It can be easy to get caught up in the beauty, but there's this beauty and at the same time this deep inner loneliness. There's a few folks from our intentional community in the circle here and online, and that's one of the things we talk about in our formation and community. Like, if you're coming here to fill that loneliness, good luck. And I think Henri's life is, and it comes through in this book, it comes through in his other books, it comes through in his biography. It like that is still there. In fact, it's highlighted in community because you're experiencing the connection and the intimacy, the love and intimacy, but also that loneliness is still a part of it. And yet there's something he's grasping at here. And I like, just last thing I'll say is it's beautiful, that ambiguity of the divine catcher and the divine in community that kind of gets named there, right? It's community, it's fleshy and embodied, but there's also a sense of the divine in that, of God within that, right? And that comes back. So, I mean, you can hear it in the breaking down of dualisms. He's struggling, and like, this is mid-90s, and he's talking about transgender, asexual, like, so, you know, he is things that society is now engaging around breaking down of dualisms are the thing, and this is coming out as well in his view of community. Like, how do we live this? How do we live deeply rooted? You know, he's a Roman Catholic priest, for goodness sake, and yet he's talking about this other reality. So that's my little commentary. Let's keep reading. Unless you have anything you want to say.
No, it's great. I think we starting with you with
173.
That's right.
You know, when I got to know the Rodleys a lot better, I also realized that they were not an ideal family. Well, no family is ideal. They have conflict. They have struggles. They have difficulties bodily, mentally, spiritually. They are just people like we are. But one of the things they said to me, you know, when you go on the trapeze, forget everything else. Be only there and be totally there. So here we are. People full of conflicts, difficulties, worries, concerns, guilt feelings, hopes, all that. But somehow the ability to be totally present in the present. That creates a kind of glimpse of eternity, gives you a glimpse of the true life. You certainly know what real beauty is, or real harmony is, or real unity is. Something that your heart most desires for a second.
And then we go back to the framing of the story where Henri is actually in the midst of his first heart attack. Is the medical crisis happening? And true story, he got taken out through a window by paramedics. Perched now atop the medical lift in the open air, Henri wonders for a moment how precarious his present situation is. Yet he couldn't help remembering what he said about risk in the film interview.
We all want to make triples and doubles and layouts and doubles and all of these other things. We like to take risks. We like to be free in the air, in life. But you have to know there's a catch-up. We have to know that when we come down from it all, we're going to be caught. We are going to be safe.
Henri, trust the catcher, he reminds himself now. And then this next section is from interviews made for a film called Angels Over the Net in 1995. So he's describing his life for the film audience.
Now, I live and work with people with mental handicaps, and some also have severe physical handicaps. One of the things that has struck me in my life was that the people with physical and mental handicaps are quite often very able to create community. I live in a community with people from 21 different nations. Some people are married, some people are single, some people are old, some people are young, some people are Japanese, and some are Brazilian. And normally, these people would never form community. But in the middle of them, there are people with a weak body who often can't even speak, who can't express themselves in ideas or big discussions. Yet still, these people are able to create a community among people who otherwise would never live together. For me, this is a really new discovery. You know, first I taught. I loved to teach in the university. Then I felt I missed something of the heart. So I discovered the life of handicapped people. It was a real discovery. And the handicapped people became also my teachers, the teachers of the heart. While they can't speak, while they cannot explain, they tell me something. They tell me that being is as important as doing, more important than doing. They tell me that the heart is more important than the mind. They tell me that community is more important than doing things alone. All these great, valuable truths these handicapped people taught me without any words. When I saw the Rodleys, I saw in a way the same thing. I saw people who didn't speak on a trapeze, who do something with their bodies, and who create community, first of all, among themselves as a little group, and among all these people who come to see them, young people, old people, children, people from all different languages. They all understand. They create family. Wherever they go, they bring people together.
Should we just keep going?
I think so.
205.
Let's do it.
Okay. Henri had a friend at daybreak named Adam, and he wrote quite a bit about Adam. And a few weeks after Adam's death, Henri and his friend Frank Hamilton traveled to New Mexico. "When you go to Santa Fe, be sure to visit my friend Jim," Fred Rogers urged them. Jim Smith, writer and publisher, suggested lunch at his favorite El Dorado hotel. They enjoyed a leisurely lunch, speaking about our personal histories, spirituality, books, and of course, Santa Fe, Henri remembered. Delighted with their new acquaintance, Henri and Frank invited him for dinner a few nights later.
It became a quite remarkable evening. After dinner, I showed him the video Angels Over the Net about the Flying Rodleys, and told him that I always wanted to write a book about them, but I hadn't found the right form. Jim responded quite radically. "You must write the book because you have given it so much of your energy and attention. You have to trust your intuition that your friendship with these trapeze artists allows you to say something very important about the meaning of life." I said, yes, indeed, that intuition is deep and strong, but I am afraid. When I first saw the Rodleys, something very deep and intimate within me was touched. They brought back in a very vivid way the longings I had as a 17-year-old boy for communion, community, and intimacy. Much of the longings went underground during my time at the seminary and the university and my many years of teaching. They only manifested themselves in occasional mental wanderings, curiosities, feelings of anguish. When I went to L'Arche, I allowed all these feelings and emotions and passions to reemerge. But seeing the Rodleys catapulted me in a new consciousness. There in the air, I saw the artistic realization of my deepest yearnings. It was so intense that even today, I do not dare to write about it because it requires a radical new step, not only in my writing, but also in my life. Jim said, "I knew all this." The video showed it to me. The Rodleys are completing something within you that for many years remained uncompleted. It has to do with your sexuality, your search for community, and your deep yearning for completeness. When you do not write the book, you will deny yourself an enormous opportunity for growth.
So a few months later, we're now in 1996. Henri doesn't know it, but he's in the last few months of his life. And his last visit with the Flying Rodleys happens in Germany in July of 1996. He jumped off the train in Obersel, Germany, and looked eagerly around for Rodley. They greeted each other with a big hug and hurried back to the circus.
July 9th, 1996, I hadn't expected that I would be so moved seeing the Rodleys again. But I found myself crying as I saw them flying and catching under the circus cupola. As I watched them in the air, I felt some of the same profound emotions that I felt when I saw them for the first time with my father in 1991. It is the emotion, hard to describe, but it is the emotion coming from the experience of an enfleshed spirituality. Body and spirit are fully united. The body in its beauty and elegance expresses the spirit of love, friendship, family, and community. And the spirit never leaves the here and the now of the body. I suddenly realized that's what life is all about. We are invited to make a lot of triples and jumps, but the great thing is to trust the catcher and to know we will be caught when we come down from our special tricks. Do I dare to let go and to say that will happen even when I am a little scared sometimes? I'm grateful that we could be together. Let's pray for one another that what we do in the coming years will be full of courage, full of confidence, full of trust.
And that's how the book ends. It's a beautiful, beautiful wrapping up with that underlying theme, as you can guess now, of trust and trust in community, trust of the catcher. There's not much more that can be said. It's, you know, it's the conclusion of it all. And obviously a major theme in the spiritual life, certainly within the Christian tradition that I'm part of, that radical trust. What does it mean? And as beauty of the book outlines, that's trust in the human catchers. And it goes through into some technical stuff. Like if you catch the wrong way, you're going to break the person's wrist. Right? And then, so there's that sense of coordination and also a sense of a net underneath you. You know, sometimes you need to know when not to try and catch. So obviously the metaphor can keep going pretty far. And, you know, I hope that those readings have given you a bit of a taste of what's going on in the book in terms of that call to trust, that call to beauty, that call to, I mean, for me, and this is a call I've been experiencing for a while, like how do you, and it's, I think it's in Henri's longings, like how do you get to that deep, beyond the surface noise which is all around us. And I mean, I think what's appealing to me, and I think to so many about Henri's writings, is that's what he's doing through all his writings, through different phases, whether that's, you know, in front of a painting, or whether that's with Adam, or whether that's here with the flying rod leaves, like, and trying to reframe that trust and push it deeper, push it in a deeper way.
And also that as he said, and as Joe read, it's better to do things together than alone. That you don't fly alone. No one's going to take off flying alone. You won't get caught. There are things we can only do together. And so it was really important today that we embody that, that we do this reading together, that we do this together. To me, that's just really fun. Thank you.
Thank you. And a whole series of misadventures came. We were supposed to do this a few months ago, and there was.
I got COVID.
Yes, I wasn't going to say, but yes. Carolyn got COVID. Joe would have been in Toronto Zooming in, and so things pieced together to this day, this auspicious day where we actually get to kind of inflesh it together to do this. In a second, I think we'll do a song and then move into question and answer. Any last pieces? I mean, we have this treasure of you here, Carolyn, who's engaged this stuff, not just as a writer, but in your inner life as well, obviously, and engaging this whole stuff and within your own story in community. Any kind of pieces that you want to sort of draw out, anything you want to say beyond the text, I guess, just before we move into.
Not right now. I think we caught it in the reading and in what I just said about how important it was for me that we actually embody trust and community right in this event.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So I think what we'll do is we'll sing one more song, and then we'll open it up. I see there's some notes in the chat there already, and we'll do that. But when we were we thought that as we thought about songs, we were like, do we draw on the kind of tradition that Henri was probably most immersed in, you know, kind of a sort of liberal Catholic contemplative world, or do we give a bit of a counterpoint to that world? And obviously Henri's life kind of was in all sorts of different worlds, but just in terms of his time and space as a Catholic priest. So we thought we'd actually go to an old spiritual, Precious Lord, Take My Hand, which again, not unlike the kind of more fun and campy All Fly Away, gets at some of the themes, you know, take my hand in the air there. So this song, I was reading this book side by side with the history of African American gospel music. So, you know, Reverend Thomas A. Dorsey wrote this song after his, he got a memo that you told me the story. His wife died, and I think the child.
And he had to travel by train.
Yeah.
And he wrote this song.
And it created a great place of inability to create. He couldn't sing anymore. He'd lost his ability to sing. And I think the story goes that he sat down at this piano. Somebody pushed him and said, like, you got to do this.
You got to pray.
You got to pray. And he kind of hit that first chord. And it just flowed out of him. And one of the great songs from the African American gospel tradition gets born out of that pain, which is not unfamiliar within that tradition, but it's so let's do it.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I'm weak, I'm worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call. Hold my hand, Lord, lest I fall. take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near, and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. At the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord.